Hi, Year 9, and welcome to week 3. So I'm going to be talking about how we're going to annotate the poem by Ali Cobby Eckermann called Circles and Squares. First thing I need you to do is to upload the PowerPoint or however you received your work. If you got it printed out from the school, that's fine as well. We're going to be looking for our annotating text notes. Okay, so this was the video I asked you guys to watch during week 2, which explained the process of annotating, and hopefully some of you guys were able to follow along with her annotating to see how annotating works. And then you're also given 10 steps here that tells us how we should annotate a poem. Now, what I've done is I've copied and pasted this into a document and I've printed it out. For those people that are following on with the PowerPoint for this week, you would have seen the photo of my setup of what my desk looks like right now. So I have right there the steps to annotating a poem, so I can just go through them one by one. If you like, you don't have to do that. You can just make sure this PowerPoint is open every time that you need to annotate something. This is the PowerPoint you should be looking for, steps to annotating a poem, and you just follow these 10 steps. That's all it is. So the poem we're going to look at, I'm just going to open it up over here, is Circles and Squares by Ali Cobby Eckermann. Last week we heard her speak about what inspired her poem, how it came about. We know that she's part of the stolen generation and that her family before her were part of the stolen generation. That is gone on for 3 to 4 generations now, and she's still feeling that sort of not abandonment. She's still feeling very sensitive about who she is as a person. What does it mean to be Indigenous? What does it mean to be raised by white parents? All that kind of stuff. And that's sort of where this poem came from. It was her exploring her square side and her circle side. But before we get into any of this analysis, we're going to follow the steps for annotating a poem. So our step 1 is initial reading of the poem. Write any questions that pop in your head while doing the initial reading. So if you were looking at the PowerPoint for this week, which I believe is here, I'm still in the process of making it. This here is my study space. And you can see that I have a piece of paper and a pen ready to take notes. Now, you should always be prepared to take notes when you are annotating a text, because if you're like, oh, what does that mean? And then later on you'll come back to it and you'll totally forget. Another thing you can do if you don't want to do paper notes, I love paper notes, is when you're reading, you can actually, let's just say this is what we don't understand. Go over here, new comment, and we can write our question here. So what is Yan Poon YT JATJARA? There we go. And then that's just there, so we've got our question. So depending on how you're working, how you prefer to work, I like working on pen and paper. Whatever works for you, just make sure that you have some way of being able to take notes while you are working. So step 1, we're reading. So I'm going to read this out loud and you guys can follow along with me. I apologize for any of the mispronunciations. I've been trying to practice that first word here, and this is the best I got. So thanks for following along, Year 9, and let's get started. Circles and Squares. I was born Yantakata Yara. Sorry. My mother was Yankutayatjara. Her mother was Yunkut Tatkanjara. My family is Yunkut Tatkanjara. Sorry, that was my phone. Ruining my own rules of no distractions. I've learnt many things from my family elders. I've grown to realize that my life travels in circles. My Aboriginal culture has taught me that universal life is circular. Okay, so my first question I have is the use of capitalization. So I'm just going to write that down. The use of capitals. I'm just going to see if this is a pattern that I can use later. Some of it is just because they're proper nouns, like family elders. But this here, like my life, is in capitals, so I feel like that might be important. And a connection to proper nouns. Okay, so I've written down that note. Let's move on. When I was born, I was not allowed to live with my family. I grew up in a white man's world. We lived in a square house. We picked fruits and vegetables from neatly fenced square plot. We kept animals in square paddocks. We sat and ate at a square table. We sat on square chairs. I slept in a square bed. I looked at myself in a square mirror. I did not know who I was. One day, I met my mother. I just knew that this meeting was part of our healing circle. Then I began to travel. I visited places that I'd never been before. But this time, I sat down with family. We gathered closely together by big round campfires. We ate bush tucker, feasting on round ants and berries. We ate meat from animals that lived in round burrows. We slept in circles on beaches around our fires. We sat in the dirt on our land that belongs to the big round planet. We watched the moon grow into a magnificent yellow circle. That was our time. I've learnt two different ways now. I am thankful for this. That is part of my life circle. My heart is round like a drum, ready to echo the music of my family. But the square within me still remains. That square hole stops me in my entirety. By Ali Cobby Eckermann. Okay, so that's our poem. So I don't have any other questions for myself rather than what does this word mean and the use of capital letters, which I noticed happened a lot more when she was near the beginning rather than when she was talking about her square life and her circle life. So that's something I'll think about as we continue our annotations. Overall, we should already know what the poem is about because of last week. But let's have a look at our next step. Our next step is identify any words that you do not understand and look them up, and then write down the definitions. Now, this is going to be different for all of us. I am 37 years old and I've been teaching English for 8 years. I have a master's degree. I have written books. I read a lot. My vocabulary is going to be much larger than yours. We have different worlds, and that's just how it is. So what I would do is I would highlight, so using my highlight tool up here, and I'm going to choose, I don't like yellow, so I'm going to choose this blue color. Okay, so anything that I don't identify, any of the words I don't understand, and I'm just going to go through each line. Okay, so obviously I don't need to underline them all because I've already highlighted it here. I understand this. I'm going to highlight this word. Okay, so I want you to go through and highlight. I know what circular means. I just feel like you guys need to see more highlighting so you don't feel bad. If you need to highlight every other word, that is fine. One of the great things about English is that it's all about interpretation and what we bring to the text. Okay, if you don't know what all these words mean, then you'll find out so much more about English and how language works. And if you know all these words, then awesome. Then you can move on to the next step. Okay, so I'm gonna underline some paddocks. I know what paddocks are, but like I said, we're gonna use some different colors. I feel like this might be an important one to know. While I feel like I know what a healing circle is, I am interested to see if that's actually part of traditional land ownership or something that Indigenous people do that isn't like a normal Western idea about what healing is. So I am interested in that idea. So I will download that. And I think thankful for this. Okay, so that's going to be all the words that I don't know. And so as part of number 2, we are then going to look them up. Now what you do to look up words is you copy, and then we're going to go to Google. Google. Meaning. Okay, what is... So it is a sparsely populated local government area for Aboriginal people located in the remote northwest of South Australia. Okay, so her family and the lineage of her family through her mother's bloodline comes from that remote northwest of South Australia. So while it's not as important, I guess, for us to know what the word means, it is important for us to know what part of the world it connects to. Because Indigenous people have a very strong belief about how land and where they come from is part of their personality. It's the same way that people are like, oh, I'm English, or I'm American, I'm Australian, or that sort of stuff. So for them, it's just as important as saying, I'm Australian. Her calling herself a, I'm so sorry for butchering this language again, Yankatayatjaram. It's just as important for her to be able to say that as it is for us to say what we are, where we come from. It's also can be connected to religious experience, because all the different groups of people or groups of Indigenous people that lived in these areas would have slightly different life structures that they would go through. So if we wanted to look up more about her people, we know that we would have to look for those people that live in northwest South Australia. So once I know what this means, I would then take this over to my notes here. I would highlight this new comment and indigenous population that lives in, what is it, northwest? I'm just going to double check that because I don't want to get it wrong. Yes, northwest South Australia. And lives in northwest South Australia. Okay, look at circular. Okay, having the form of a circle, already containing an assumption that has been proved, therefore, nope, we don't need the logic, and we don't need that. So we're going to go with being in the form of a circle. It's pretty easy. Okay, circular, in the form of a circle. Oops. There we go. Paddocks. Go back to our Google. Yes, I meant to put that space in. A small field where horses are kept or exercised. Okay, so small field where animals are kept. And then healing circle. So I'm not just going to put healing circle definition like I've done for all the other words, which is fine. I'm actually going to write in here indigenous, if I can spell it correctly. Yes, I can. Okay, so here we go. Healing circles. Like I thought, healing circles is actually something really important. For them, it's not what we might always assume. And it says up here, so many Aboriginal communities and urban Aboriginal people in the field of social services are utilising healing circles, talking circles, or sharing circles as a way to provide group support for people who are dealing with issues such as addiction, violence, grief, and trauma. So that's really interesting that they're taking these traditional Indigenous ideas, and using them in modern ways. So it's not just about healing, mentally when something happens. They're also talking about like addictions and domestic violence and grief and trauma. So I think that's actually really cool. But what is, here we go. Healing circles are often called hokoka, in the Lakota language. Okay, so the word that she would use personally is maybe different to Hokoka because this is in the Lakota language. I don't know what language she speaks as an Indigenous person, but it's good to know. So Hokoka means sacred circle. Is also the word for an altar. The Hokoka consists of people who sit together in a talking circle in prayer, in ceremony, and are committed to helping one another and to each other's healing. Cool. This might be something we'll look at later. What does a circle represent in Aboriginal culture? So we'll keep that open for now. Okay, so purpose of healing circles. At the core of Aboriginal restorative process is generally a healing circle which aims at developing a consensus on how to repair the harmful result of the offence. A healing circle will include members of the community, including the offender, elders, and often the victim if they agree to participate. Okay, so this might be another form of healing circle. This feels a lot more like what would happen in their sort of policing of the people, because it says they're like the offender and a judge, or like the elders, and often the victim. So that's, I feel like, is a different kind of healing circle to the one that she's talking about. And I'd say that because of context. If we look at the sentence, I just knew that this meeting was part of our healing circle. So I don't feel like it's more of a judgment. I feel like it's more of a community coming together, like those first few definitions, only because of where it comes in this section here. So context is always really important as well. So let's just scroll back here. So here we go. It consists of people who sit together in a talking circle, in prayer, in ceremony, and committed to helping each other and each other's healing. I feel like that is much more what the poem is looking for because of context. So let's go back to our healing circle. Oops. Highlight our healing circle and comment. Awesome. Have any others? No, that was it. Okay, if you have more words that you will need to find definitions for, now is the time to pause this video and to go through them all and do exactly what you just saw me do, and that is open up Google, Google it, work out the definition based on context, and then put your definition in here. I will wait so you can pause it now. All right, let's have a look at the next part. Before we move on to question 3, I want us to have a look at the questions we wrote down about the poem. So one of our first questions was here, which I showed you how to do it online on your document. Okay, so what is, and we already defined that, so we don't need to worry about this one anymore. But the one I wrote down is the use of capitals. Now I'm just going to highlight when she uses capitals, and I'm going to highlight that in gold. Okay, so we got the first line, of course, is a capital letter because that's how poetry is written. So mother is in capital, family is capitalized, family elders is capitalized. Okay, my life traveled in circles. This is all capital. My Aboriginal culture taught me that universal life, life again. Okay, when I was born, I was not allowed to live with my family. Grew up in the white man's world. We lived in a square house. Yeah, square, in a square paddock. We ate at a square table. We sat on square chairs. And we slept in square beds. She looked at herself in the square mirror. Okay, when I met my mother, just the beginning of our healing circle. I don't know if it's not gonna let me double that. So I'm just gonna highlight that little part there so I know that that is one as well. Just do that. Family round. Okay. Now as we do this, we should start to see patterns emerging in what is being capitalized and what isn't. And we can see that when she uses the word square and round, they are often capitalized. So we can assume that that has some kind of significance. And we'll talk about that in a second. Different ways. Thankful. My life circle. My heart is round. The square. Okay. Now this is really interesting. This might just be my English brain overreacting. It says here in this last little couplet, which if you guys remember is 2 lines, but the square within me still remains. The square hole stops me in my entirety. This square isn't capitalized. Why? Remember, authors, especially in poetry, very rarely do anything without purpose. There is a reason why this one isn't capitalized. There's a reason why she chose to do that, and I'm curious about why. But we'll get to that when we get closer into our interpretation. I just want to look at the moment about our capitalization. So we have squares and rounds, life circle, okay, our land. We can get rid of some of them which are just proper nouns like mother. Okay, so if we got rid of, because when we say mother, it generally has a capital. Okay, that's again with Aboriginal. I don't know about culture, Aboriginal culture. Family, square, get rid of mother. Healing circle. I feel like this could be a proper noun, so we'll get rid of that one. Moon is the name of a thing. Okay. Time, life circle. Again, because that's like the name of the process, sorry, I'm going to get rid of that. Okay. So looking at this, we can see this pattern emerging where the things that are super important to her are being capitalized because she wants them to be more important. Why do we use proper nouns? Okay, proper nouns are the names of places, things, or people. And it shows that they're important than other words in the sentence. So, for example, if I wanted to get your attention, I would use your first name. When my mum wants to get my attention, she uses my full name. And I know that means that, oh, I've got to pay attention because that's me. And if I call you by name, you're like, oh, I've got to pay attention because that's me. When I'm writing and I say things like, I miss my mum, and I use a capital M, then obviously mum has importance because she gets that capital letter. So that's kind of why we capitalize names and stuff. It's because it's important. We want people to know it's important. That's why they're special. And she's used this differently here. So she's used that concept of what is special, how do we make things stand out, and she's used it to make us think more deeply about her language. So her universal life. If she had a little L life, it's just a regular life. That's just what everyone lives. But capital L life is important to her. So what else is important to her? Her family is important. Life is important. Circles are important. Squares are important. Round circles. Our land, that's all important. Our time, that's important. Round and square. So because she capitalized both circles and squares in this, I can come to the conclusion that her life in her circle world as an Indigenous person is just as important as her life in a square world with her adopted parents. They are both part of her personality that she's been forced to grow up with and now coming to understand better as an adult, and that's why she has chosen to capitalize it, because she's pointing out this is important. Okay, her culture is important. Her life, her personal life story is important. And so that's why she has the use of capital letters throughout her poem. And we can see that, our land, ours is important. She's making sure that the planet is connected to round, which is connected to circles, which is connected to her Indigenous heritage. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the breakdown of stanzas, but it's important to think about how sentences like this are going together and making us think things and feel things without her having to say deliberately, look, I'm talking about my Indigenous background and how that's connected to a big round planet because Indigenous people live in circle lives. Okay, same here. My heart is round like a drum. Okay, so she's comparing her heart, which is round, to the circle, which is Indigenous. So in her heart, when we talk about that in a symbolic kind of way, her heart is Indigenous and it beats indigenously. Okay, ready to echo to the music of my family. She's not talking about her square family. Her heart is for her Indigenous family. But the square within me still remains. The square hole stops me in my entirety. Now, I think I worked out why this is a little s and this is a big S. So when she talks about square with a big S, she's talking about her life as an adopted child into a very white family. I do believe that they were German, if memory serves. So she was adopted by people who are very, very white, and she is not very white. So she would have felt like a standout in her world. One of the very few Indigenous kids that went to her school. All of her family wouldn't have looked like her. And so that's her capital S square life. But this square hole, that's not her life. This is more of a symbol, if that makes sense. This little s square is a physical square. So if you've ever tried to put a round peg in a square hole, it doesn't work. So she's not saying that her square life, her adopted life, is stopping her from being Indigenous. She's saying that the expectations of her square life is stopping her from being entirely round. I hope that makes sense. If not, leave some comments and I'll try to explain it a little bit more. But I actually think those last two lines are super cool, which I didn't notice the first time I taught this. So there you go, kids. We're always learning something new every day. This video has gone long enough, so I'm going to stop there. We have done steps 1 and 2 of annotating a poem. We've answered the question that I put down, or questions that I put down when we first started reading. The next video will deal with the next steps, which is all about our rhyming scheme and the actual poem itself. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!